Greetings, welcome to the DragonCon Urban Fantasy Track author interview series. And I am joined this evening by the incomparable Kevin Hearne. Kevin, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. It's wonderful to see you. And someday, maybe, actually in person again, but for now, I'm just really pleased to see you this way.
Thanks so much, Carol. I really appreciate you having me.
Of course. Now, the first thing that I like to ask people, mainly because I'm always interested to find out, is did you read fantasy and science fiction and, within the genre yourself as either a child or a young adult?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually started out reading a lot of Alan Dean Foster. That dude has written over 200 books now. He's been around a while. And he was writing both science fiction and fantasy novels. And so, and he was pumping them out pretty fast. So I could go into the bookstore fairly reliably and get a new book of his pretty easily. So, I read both science fiction and fantasy from Alan Dean Foster, and then, from a bunch of other folks as well. And but it's from Alan Dean Foster that I kind of got my taste for fantasy. His Spell Singer series is kind of what got me into things, and of course that has talking animals in it, and so you could kind of see how that wound up manifesting itself in my writing. So that's where I started. Cut my teeth, etc.
Okay. Well, that is interesting. I did not realize that about the talking animals. So yes, that does explain a few things.
Yeah, very formative.
Yeah, I guess so, especially if you've been thinking about it pretty much your whole life, right?
Yeah.
Now, mythology and folklore play a huge role in the backstory and the world building of the Iron Druid Chronicles. And did your interest in those particular areas kind of help spur the ideas for the series, or did it kind of happen the other way around?
They certainly helped. And my background in it also reduced my research time a little bit, because I'd already, done a lot of the research prior. I didn't have to look things up so much. But I think that it certainly informed it. I was able to, figure out, well, how would these things work together a little bit. And that was a large part of the joy for me, is approaching the Irish stuff, which a lot of people hadn't really gotten into so much in fiction. Mm-hmm. So because it hadn't been widely used, I enjoyed researching it and then kind of fitting it together with all the stuff that everybody does know, like the Greco-Roman stuff, and to a lesser extent, but certainly quite popular, the Norse stuff. So those things became, the Greco-Romans and the Norse are very well known. Mm-hmm. So people could use that as sort of a touchstone, and then, here's all this new stuff and how it fits together. That was a lot of fun for me.
Okay. Well, I mean, I really did wonder, because I think, it's hard to imagine those two things being connected or unconnected.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine having that series without that background. And, it just, that makes a lot of sense. That I like that it reduced your research time. And I would like to warn our viewers that I will try to remember to warn when specific spoilers come up, that if you have not finished the complete series, if you haven't read all the way through Scourge, there may be a few of these questions that will serve as spoilers, but we won't get there quite yet. But we'll I will try to be good and remember to remind people at that time.
Okay.
But now my next question, that it shouldn't be a spoiler, really, is from your perspective, who or what do you feel was the most dangerous foe that Atticus ever faced in the series?
In some ways, his own very long past was really his most dangerous enemy. He was constantly trying to live in the present, and that's why his hound Oberon was really helpful to him, because dogs do live in the present, right? They're always like, what is around me right now? What is there that I can, smell? What can I eat? What can I pee on? All of that kind of stuff is what's very much, in the mind of a dog, and they're going to take joy in whatever it is they're doing. And that joy is infectious, and it keeps Atticus grounded in the present rather than dwelling on the past. It was the thing that I was just wondering, like, a lot of people say, I want to live forever, or I want to live a much longer time. I'm like, well, do you really? Like, what would happen? Because if you live a long time and everybody else doesn't, that is going to start to suck at some point. And so how are you going to deal with the grief of everybody you love, dying, and you're still around? Then what does that do to you psychologically? And how do you cope? And that was really a part of what I was kind of exploring there. The vampires, they don't die, and they become very old and cold, as is the phrase I think I used. And but Atticus is trying to stay, empathetic and caring about people, but still he's got a lot of tragic backstory as a result just of living so long. So how does he deal? So yeah, that's kind of what the way I was approaching his character, and what I was most interested in.
Now maybe, and I probably should have done this before, but maybe we should give anyone who is watching this who maybe hasn't read the series yet, what would be your basic elevator pitch description of what the series is about?
Oh, okay. Well, there's this 2,000-year-old druid who has been in hiding for a long time, because back in the 1st century, he stole a magic sword from the Tuatha De Danann, the gods of the Irish, and he doesn't want to give it back. So he's been in hiding. And what happens is, the series basically starts when he gets found, and he decides, well, I'm not going to run anymore. Let's go ahead and fight this out. And his decision to fight instead of run kind of snowballs on him. So that's basically the series.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Now, who have been some of your favorite secondary or recurring characters to write in the series?
Of course, I love the Widow McDonough. She was around for a little while, and then kind of interesting. I really liked Greta, and it was an interesting thing where Greta appeared briefly or was mentioned in the first 6 books, but never developed as a character. We didn't get to really meet her and figure out what her story was until we got to book 7. And then, she finally started to come into her own, and we started to see what was up with her. And so I really liked that I had the luxury, I guess, of having this character kind of be there all along, and then finally get to address, what she was like and what her priorities were. That's one of the nice things about a long-running series, I guess.
Right. And she and Owen were an interesting match, I guess you could say. And it happened rather quickly, that they were immediately, attracted to each other, I guess, seeing something in the other that I think that they both probably admired, but also that, that they could appreciate, and that kind of they complemented each other. So
I mean, neither of them particularly liked other people, so they were as surprised as everybody else, to actually find somebody that they liked. So yeah,
that's a good way of putting it. I hadn't really thought about that, but yes. And speaking of Owen, in Hunted, you started using the multiple points of view, telling the story from
Yeah.
multiple points of view. And in Hunted, it was just, Atticus and Granuel. I'm probably pronouncing her name
That's pretty good.
incorrect. It was called
Good.
Granuel, um, and what my question is that, and then in the next book, you did actually have Owen take turns as well.
Yeah.
And was this approach more of a challenge for you as a writer, and or was it kind of freeing to be able to tell the story from a different character's view?
Well, challenging certainly. Yeah, you have to keep the voices separate.
Right.
You have to make it, and they can't all sound like the same person. They also can't sound like me. So, you have to really pay attention to language use and things like that. And I would occasionally catch some things in my edits, like, "Ooh, Granuel said this thing, she would never actually say that. She would phrase this differently," or vice versa. Atticus is now talking like Granuel, and he wouldn't do that. So, you have to, pay attention to that stuff. But it was actually a lot of fun. I really enjoyed using different voices. The exploration of voice and the language that people use is a favorite subject of mine, and it wound up being very good practice for when I wound up writing my epic fantasy, the Seven Kennings, where I have 11 or 12 different first-person points of view, and they all have to sound like very different people. So that's it probably came from my appreciation of the Canterbury Tales.
Okay.
That's the thing where here's all these different, very different people from different walks of life, and they have different stories to tell, different senses of humor. And I loved that when I was studying it in college, and probably became infectious as I was going. I also read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest while I was in college, and I really loved what he did with voice there. It was one of the another formative experience for me, because you have the narrator, Chief Bromden, who is suffering some mental issues at the very beginning of the book, and he gradually gets better throughout the course of the novel. By the end of the novel, his language is significantly better as his mental state has improved. His syntax, his vocabulary, everything is better than it was at the beginning of the book. And I thought, and it was a gradual progression. And I thought that was extraordinary, and it attracted me to writing in first person in the first place. I'm like, look what you could do with this point of view that you can't really do with others. You can really demonstrate somebody's state of mind through their language. And that's what I enjoyed.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense that you would feel that way. And it was very effective. As a reader, I found it very effective to have that. And then we've got the little clue at the beginning of each chapter with the little icon thing being different for the 3 different characters that, for the last few books. So that was helpful, just because if you were flipping ahead, you'd be like, okay, now I'm going to be hearing what Owen has to say.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Or is Atticus going to get out of this scrape, right away, or is it going to take a little while?
Yeah.
Now, the Meaty Mysteries series, the Oberon's Meaty Mysteries, did you do that for those were fun, but were they as kind of a sort of a diversion, I guess I could say? Did it because they tied into the books, but they weren't. I mean, they were standalone stories, but they must have been a lot of fun.
They were a blast.
I mean,
actually, and it led to some art that I really, really adore. It's actually behind me right here. The picture of the first one, the Purloined Poodle, where Atticus is sitting in this chair, and he's got his, the fingers steepled together, and Oberon and Starbuck are sitting there by him, by the fire, and it's like a parlor, like a Sherlock Holmes kind of thing going on. There's actually, like, if you look closely at the artwork, there's a portrait of Sherlock Holmes on the wall, and I love the fact that there's a lot of I love the art by Galen Dara, and I've always this is probably my favorite piece of art, honestly. These 3 pieces actually that are behind me here are my favorite things by Galen Dara, and it was a lot of fun for me to kind of dip my toes into mystery, just very slightly, but it was also a lot of fun to try to narrate something from the point of a dog who is like, okay, what happens when you take a character who's primarily intended to be comic relief and then make him the narrator, the star? Can you even do that? And so that was what I was, that was the challenge for me. Can I try a slightly different genre or tack on a little genre to what I'm already doing? And then also, can I take a character that's usually designed to be, a sidekick and then make them the star? Would it even work? And so that's what I was doing there.
Yeah, and I like your point about making it a slightly different genre, because you got a magic dog, essentially, that is, he's trying to solve a crime using, with the help of his sidekick and his human. He's trying to, whether a magic human, but using conventional methods too. So that was an interesting kind of part. One of the I gotta say, one of the things that I've always enjoyed the most about Oberon, when you hear things from his point of view, is when his concept of time.
Yeah.
That was genius. That is so funny. Or it's like, well, 5 million days or 2 weeks or whatever. Unless they're equivalent. Yeah. And it's to me, that's just hilarious, because when I see that, I think about dogs. We don't have a dog, nor have we had one for years, but I have grand dogs. That my children have dogs, and so when I read things from Oberon's perspective, I'm like, yeah, I could see whichever doing this. So
yeah, dogs are totally living in the present. They're not thinking about the future, except like, am I going to get a sausage in the very near future? You know what I mean? They're always very centered on the moment. So that was a thing that where, since that's the case, since they don't really have a concept of, they just don't really appreciate time the way we do. Whatever the time is right now, that's the only time that matters. We're going to live right now. So.
And that is a good, that when you said that before about, kind of pairing him with someone in Atticus's position, it is a great juxtaposition of viewpoints, and how and then some of the other things. And I was talking about Oberon. There were 2 times that he it just brought, I mean, I think I probably did have a tear come to my eye.
All right.
When in Hunted, when Atticus is briefly dead.
Yeah.
Well, they think he's dead.
Yes.
And Oberon is communing with Granuel, and he tells her that I want to be where he is.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh. And then there's a similar passage in Scourged where he wants to go with Atticus to this big battle, and he says, but I want to be where you are. And I just thought, oh, that was very touching. So
yeah, I got some interesting emails from people after Hunted came out. Whether they listened to the audiobook or whether they were reading, they were a little bit mad at me for that bit because it made them feel things. I'm like, well, that's kind of what I'm supposed to do. So
right.
Yeah. So but yeah, like one guy though was a trucker and he was listening on audio while he's driving and he's like, oh, I ran off the road. I was crying, I couldn't see, and I'm like, well, I'm sorry, man. I'm glad you're safe.
I mean, it's funny and yet it's not.
Right.
I mean, it could have been very serious, but the fact that he brought it up.
Yeah.
Well, now, and I will insert my spoiler warning here, because the next couple of questions could be considered spoilers for Scourge. So if people have not either completed that book or, whatever, they might want to skip ahead a few minutes in the recording. Just until we get past it. But my question is, how far in advance of actually writing Scourged and what was, basically the end of the series, how far in advance did you know how it was going to end? Had you, or did this just kind of happen?
Okay, so if you go back and read Hounded in chapter 2, I foreshadow what happens there. It's like in the I don't know, second page of chapter 2 or third page, something like that, when Atticus is talking to the Morgan. He actually, says what eventually happens to him and what will happen afterward. So that, yeah, the foreshadowing is there in the first book, very early in the first book. So yes, I knew all along.
You did know all well, and
Yeah.
that just goes to show you it's been years since I read the first one, and I gave it to somebody and never got it back. So
That's fine. That's all good. That's great. That's perfect.
so now okay, so in the very beginning, you did know.
Yeah, there are
Now,
other, like, if you go through, there are other, like, once you know the end, then you can
right,
go through and go,
go
oh
back.
crap, he did set this up, yeah. So
Yeah, and that does happen. I mean, if you, for someone like you that does know in advance, if you're dropping little hints along the way,
Yeah.
when people go back and review things, they go, oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that happens sometimes with with television programs that
Yep.
go on for a while. Then you say, oh well, yeah, just wait, something they say in season 2 actually happens in season 10 or something. So
Yep. Yeah. I love
now,
stuff like that.
yeah. And you think, oh, just wait,
Yeah.
because when you first heard it, you didn't think much of it, or you might have thought it was amusing, but you didn't understand it until 8 years later, right?
Yeah.
Now, in Scourged, Thor makes a statement to Atticus, and he says, that is the true poison of prophecy and destiny, the implication that you are somehow not responsible for your actions. And of course, we know that this passage also applies to Atticus.
Mm-hmm.
And did you feel as though Atticus had actually come to that conclusion before this time, before what happened to him in this particular scene, or did it happen at that time?
He'd been feeling it for a while. There are passages in Tricked, there are passages in Hunted. There's, a lot of places where he realizes that there are consequences for his actions. I mean, even in Hammered, you had two deities tell him,
yeah,
don't do this or there will be consequences. And he's like, well, I'm doing it anyway. I'm like, all right then. And so, if it was a thing where that wasn't necessarily, I guess, a prophecy, but they were telling him this fork of the future is going to go a certain way if you don't, pull back here and make a different choice. So he realizes eventually, like these are the consequences of my own actions. Oh my goodness, I have to, actually live with these consequences now. And prophecies are kind of, difficult that way, right? Sometimes they're like, well, I really don't like the idea that, things will happen a certain way. But in some cases they're not just wildly, suddenly this happens, it's more of a, hey, there are causes and effects. And if these causes happen, then these effects are going to happen down the road. And it's not really, I guess, a destiny so much as you can kind of tell sometimes that people will make decisions based on emotional things and then have to deal with the fallout later. And that's kind of what was going on, with Atticus and with everybody, right? You make a decision that's an emotional one for you at the time, and not necessarily, it's not always, I should say, it's not always the logical or rational choice that will lead you to happiness down the road. It's just what you think you have to do at the time. So there is it applies to Thor, but yes, it very much is supposed to apply to Atticus. A lot of this is about, what are the consequences for your own behavior? When he decides to fight instead of turn the other cheek or run, right? Then that's what I was talking about. Everything snowballs on him because he made a choice, and then there are, there are going to be consequences for what he does. So
yeah, and I agree that that after after the events of Hammered, that he does start realizing, well, maybe this is what so and so was talking about, or maybe this is what he does kind of he kind of questions what his own, not necessarily his own motivation, because I think he knows what that is.
yeah,
but he does definitely question the wisdom of having done what he did. But I think that it does certainly come to a head in that particular in that scene, because then he doesn't have to wonder anymore. He knows
right.
what's going to happen.
And then later on, I mean, again, not to spoil anything or whatever, but in Ink and Sigil and Paper and Blood, not so much Ink and Sigil where we're really introducing new characters, but in Paper and Blood, he shows up again, and this is a good full year or more after the events of Scourged. And at that point, he's in a very different place mentally. Right. He's accepted the consequences of what happened and in Scourged, and he's living with it, and he's actually just fine with it. It took a while for him to get to that place, but he has adjusted and decided to move on, and he likes his life. So a lot of pain and suffering along the way, but it eventually got him to a better place.
Right. Well, it was, I gotta say, it was, to me, reading the end of Scourged was very affecting. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I found it very emotional and not overly so, but I mean, it needs to be. It's like, if you've invested, readers who've invested them, their time and their feelings or emotions or whatever you want to call it in reading about a character for 9 books and various and sundry novellas and short stories here and there. There's got to be a payoff. If there's not some kind of payoff, then it probably wouldn't have had quite the same impact. But
here's the thing about that book is that some people are upset by what happens to him, and I'm like, well, these are the consequences of his actions. But if you think about it, everybody actually got what they wanted. It was in a way a happy ending, because Owen got what he wanted, which is the time and space to train a new grove of druids.
Mm-hmm.
Grannywell got what she wanted, which was to be a powerful druid and the ability to study around the world and everything like that, and be an independent person. She got that, and to basically take down her stepfather. She got all that. She got everything that she wanted to, and then what Atticus wanted was to stop being a fugitive for 2,000 years. He wanted to finally be free of gods hunting him, and he got it. So everybody actually got what they ultimately wanted, but there were also some consequences for what he did to get to that place. So and then again, in Paper and Blood, he's accepted that. So there you go. I mean, it might not be the traditional happy ending, but again, the Irish don't write happy, American happy endings. If you look at Irish stories, they don't have that everybody lived happily ever after. The Irish are like, that's bullshit. That doesn't happen, right? So there was some happiness down the road for everybody, but yeah, it was a lot of heartache along the way.
Well, it was done very effectively. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we've talked about Ink and Sigil a little bit. Here's a nice cover, Paper and Blood. Yes. The second one, I have an e-copy of the first book, so I can really show that. And these covers are great too. And so that is a spin-off series of sorts. And for anyone who has not read those yet, can you give us a little bit of your elevator pitch description of what that series is about?
Yeah, sure. Well, part of this is it is set in the Iron Druid universe, but we have a different narrator. So characters from the Iron Druid universe may show up, but you don't have to have read the Iron Druid Chronicles yet to jump in. But what we have is a 63-year-old man named Aloysius McVarish. He's a Scottish gentleman in Glasgow. And he is a sigil agent. He is a person who uses magical symbols imbued with magical inks to basically affect bindings on other folks or the world around him. So they're druidic in a sense, but he is not a druid. He is completing druid magic through the use of sigils. They are temporary. They fade after a short period of time. And he is not bound to the earth. He's not been trained as a druid. He's only been trained in these inks and sigils and a lot of legal stuff, because what he does is write and enforce magical contracts. So that is all what Al's doing. And he has a hobgoblin sidekick that kind of messes around. A kleptomaniac hobgoblin who just won't stop stealing stuff. So he has issues there. He's got a very mysterious receptionist named Gladys who has seen some shite. And then he has basically an accountant who sort of moonlights as a pit fighter. And she's very interesting. Her name is Nadia, and she reveals that she has some powers down the road. So anyway, it's a lot of fun and a lot of good times in Scotland and elsewhere. And we do have a lot of interactions with the Fae, because he is, basically trying to keep the Fae in their realm and the humans separate in their realm. And, that way we all can live peacefully and maybe not get in so much trouble.
Yeah, maybe, but then his
right.
job wouldn't be quite as exciting. Now, the thing that I get a kick out of about Al is that he's kind of, when you have these passages talking about him and his being physically tired, or oh well, I can't go do what Nadia's doing. I'm thinking in specifically to a lot of the events in Paper and Blood.
Yeah.
When he can't, he's trying to book it around Australia and he's having a little more difficulty. And I thought, well, that is nice to have that little bit of reality and to have an older protagonist, to be honest.
Well, yeah, that was a thing that, I was kind of going the different direction in the Iron Druid. Like, here's a guy who's lived for 2,000 years, but has managed to keep himself looking very young, and so he's in this young body all the time. He's super healthy and strong and all that. So what if we instead have a protagonist who is 60 something and, things aren't, a 60 something body does not perform the way a 20-year-old body does. So what's going to be different for him? And, how is that going to, affect his approach to problems? I'm finding it a lot of fun because it's not a road that's been really well traveled. And I like that I get to try new things.
Yes. And it definitely is something new and fresh. And some of us that are along those lines, we appreciate that. So thank you.
Well, I'm getting there too. Yeah.
Now, to you, what would you say are the major personality differences between Atticus and Al? And in what ways do you think that they are probably somewhat alike?
That's interesting. Okay, so Al has not seen nearly as much violence as Atticus has, and doesn't have, he's not so quick to jump to it as Atticus might be. Atticus can sometimes, say, what, I got a sword, I can solve this really quickly. That's sometimes his attitude towards things. Where Al is like, is there any way that I could get out of this without actually coming to blows? It would be nice if I, if I could do that. So that's kind of a key difference to them. He would rather have maybe somebody else be the heavy hitter, and that, Nadia
Mhm.
is his heavy hitter.
Right.
So
Literally, yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that is kind of a key difference between them. In terms of how they're alike, I would say that um, they're sometimes keen observers of human nature, and they think, and also they have they find authorities annoying, but sometimes they respect what they're trying to do. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
because they have to operate outside authority, it brings them into conflict. With the police sometimes, but they don't hate the police or anything like that. But they're like, gosh, that person is annoying and making my life complicated. But I respect that they're trying to do their job well, and unfortunately, I have to outwit them right now. So that's kind of something that they have in common, because they are operating outside the boundaries of what normal law and order would say that
Right.
is acceptable.
Yes, and if only they knew, right?
Right.
Now, if Atticus or Al could make a kind of a guest appearance in another urban fantasy series, who do you think they should do that with?
Oh
Who do you
gosh.
think they would have fun with?
My favorite urban fantasy series is the Eric Carter series by Stephen Blackmore. And
Okay.
I've actually, Stephen and I have done a Tuckerization of each other in our books. Where
Okay.
he killed somebody named Kevin Hearne in his book, and I killed somebody named Stephen Blackmore in my book. We
I
basically,
think
yeah,
I think I did catch that
yeah,
actually.
we murdered each other, and so it was a lot of fun in that regard. But I really admire like the action sequences, and also just the very dry, snarky humor of the Eric Carter books. And I think that Eric Carter and Atticus, or Al, either one would have quite the adventure with Eric Carter if it came to it.
Okay, well there you go.
Yeah,
That's gonna make me that's good food for thought.
yeah.
Now, to during the time that you were still in the midst of the Iron Druid Chronicles, you took a little bit of a detour and wrote this series
Oh yeah, yeah,
with Delilah, friend
yeah.
of mine and friend of the track.
Hmm.
And she she's talked a little bit about this when I did an interview with her a little over a year ago.
Yeah.
But could you tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, what the story is, or what the idea behind the series is? And then I'm also curious, for anyone who may not have heard that other interview, if you could just tell us a little bit about what the process was that you guys used to
Sure.
write, since it was a collaboration.
Yeah. So think of the Kill the Farm Boy is a very loving tribute to epic fantasies, but also poking some fun at some very well-worn tropes in epic fantasy. So
Indeed.
basically, the idea in a lot of epic fantasies is that there's some farm boy somewhere who is approached by a mysterious figure, and that mysterious figure is usually an older person who winds up telling the farm boy that, what, you're not just a poor farm boy. You actually have a secret destiny. You're going to be the king, or you're going to be this hero, or you have, you've got some special destiny in mind. You're not just normal. You're not doomed to be a poor farm boy. You're going to be something better. So this is, the one that everybody is familiar with is the Luke Skywalker thing. But that same narrative happens over and over in epic fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And the farm boy is always going to be something more than a farm boy by the end. So we thought, what would happen if we just killed that dude at the beginning, and then let's let all of the other characters who are often relegated to side jobs what if they became the stars instead? What if, you had the farm boy removed from the equation, and now you've got a party, like think of it like a Dungeons and Dragons party of characters who sort of consistently roll critical fails. That's really what that's what Kill the Farm Boy is. It's people who are kind of misfits who are kind of thrust into the position of needing to be heroic and to save things, and not have somebody tell them that they're the ones who need to get it done. Let's do something else. So I find that it was a lot of fun to poke fun at the tropes,
Right.
and so we were doing that throughout. So if you are a frequent reader of epic fantasy, you're going to see what we're making fun of, but but at the same time, hopefully, it's also a very entertaining adventure. So and that goes for all 3 books. We wrote 3 of them all in the same world. I drew the map at the beginning of the book. That's actually my artwork there. And
Oh, wow.
I had so much fun doing it. And so we think that the world of Pell could be a world in which you could set a lot of Dungeons and Dragons adventures. So yeah, it was a lot of fun doing that. And the names are great. And so anyway, in terms of the writing process, it was a lot, almost like a game of improv. We would switch chapters. So it was always a lot of fun to receive the next chapter in the mail from Delilah, because I'm like, oh, this is going to be a good time. She's going to make me laugh. And then I get the joy of trying to make her laugh with my next chapter afterward, because she knows vaguely what's going to happen. Like they're going to go to this spot and do this one thing, but she has no idea how I'm going to pull that off or anything. So it was a lot of fun. The fact that the elves live in the Morningwood is a pun that everybody assumes that was me, but it was Delilah. That was Delilah wrote that whole chapter with a lot of penis puns in it, and yeah,
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I did mention when to her about the book is that I did find myself after she had said something about this process, I was thinking, can I actually figure that out? How? Because I believe that maybe I heard you guys speak about this at a book signing prior to having read it. And, I was like, well, can I tell? And then after hearing her say this and, describe what you guys actually did, I thought, every once in a while I would think, okay, well, that's got to be Kevin. And then I'd be like, no, but if it's switched off and on, it can't be. It's got to be.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah, like normally we have very different narrative voices, but what would happen is that I would write a chapter and Delilah would edit it and send it back. Then I accept or approve or say, no, I really want that particular phrase in there, please. Or, and this would be a vice versa thing too. I would edit her chapters and send them back, write the next chapter. So basically what would happen is that every chapter might have been originally written by somebody, but then it was also, edited by the other person. What wound up happening was that you get this hybrid voice that's not mine and not hers, and therefore you can't recognize. And the way we realized that we pulled it off correctly is that my editor was the one editing these books, and she's very familiar with my voice. And I said, all right, can you tell which chapters I wrote? She's like, nope. So so that's how we knew we pulled it off, that it wasn't something where you could always tell that I wrote it or Delilah wrote it. It wound up being very much a hybrid thing by the time we got going, because we both edited everything as well. So and also the characters were sort of held in common between us. It wasn't a thing where I always wrote Fia and she always wrote the Dark Lord Toby or something like that, So
right. So exactly.
Give them a chance, you guys. If you haven't, and it doesn't matter where you start. You could read Kill the Farm Boy. You could read No Country for Old Gnomes. You could read The Princess Beard and have fun wherever you start. So.
Yes, and mission accomplished if you were going for the hybrid voice, because it is hard to tell. Yeah. Yes, a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And you did something interesting. I know that there are many urban fantasy writers who started out writing more traditional fantasy and then moved into urban fantasy. You kind of did the other way around.
Yeah.
And while before you had quite finished the Iron Druid Chronicles, you did begin this epic fantasy series, the Seven Kennings. And what can you tell our viewers a little bit about that series in case they are unfamiliar?
Well, I'm working on the third and final book of the trilogy now. It's called A Curse of Krakens. So it starts out with a plague of giants, and then the second book is already out. It's called A Blight of Black Wings. But basically, we have this secondary, world, and we have a continent that is suddenly attacked from either coastline by two separate races of giants, and they're quite different in their social structure and also what their ultimate goals are. And this continent had been at peace for quite some time, but now suddenly they realize, they're at war and they don't have they've got to figure out how to survive. There's tremendous loss of life, and they're like, well, now we've got to rebuild too. So how are we going to do that? And what's a little bit interesting about it from a structural standpoint is I'm trying something here that I don't believe has been done very often, or if at all. I'm telling the story all from first person points of view, but there are 11 of them or more in each book. So you are getting fragments of stories, and the people telling the story, they're like, this is what happened to me in the war. But you gradually realize that these people are kind of connected, and they're telling a much larger narrative together without realizing it. And it's a bard who kind of puts them all together and basically is able to tell you the story of this war from the point of view of people who are not, kings or mighty warriors. They're people who are, who do get caught up or swept up in wars because they happen. And so how do regular people deal with this, and how do they survive and thrive, maybe, or fail, during the course of a war? So it is trying to tell the story from people who aren't always the typical history makers. The leaders, the world leaders are there, but they're not the ones who are centered in the narrative. So it's other folks that we hear from. And so I'm trying different things in that regard, structurally, narratively. So it's an epic fantasy that you haven't seen one, hopefully, just like it. It's very much trying to be a new thing rather than, kind of derivative. And then we also have a magic system called the Kennings, and their elemental magic system, but very high cost. Anybody can be blessed with the Kenning of Fire, but to get that, you have to jump into an actual lake of lava that bestows the blessing. Like if you want to be immune from fire and to be able to control fire and so on, you can have that. That's the first Kenning, but you've got to take a plunge. It's quite the leap of faith, and you might just die. and
right,
then,
it might not work out the way you want.
Yeah, and on the other hand, you might walk out of there just fine. That's the thing, is like whatever the elemental force is, if you're blessed with control over that, then you are also immune to it. If you're blessed with the fourth Kenning, you can't drown, and you have control over water, etc. So that is there's also a heavy price to pay. You age quickly the more you use that magic. So it's an interesting system. There's vast power available to anybody, but with a high risk attached. So
and it sounds as though you've had a really good time with it as well, getting to do some different things, and that's great. Now, when you write, when you have two different series going on at the same time, because some of these other things, like as I was saying with Tales of Pell, came out while you were still doing Iron Druid Chronicles, was your writing process that you would did you finish one book before you'd work on another, or are you writing two different ones at the same time, not necessarily the same day, say you'd work for a week on one, put it down. How did you do that?
That happened a little bit with I was working on I believe I was working on a Plague of Giants, or no, it was the Blight of Blackwings. And because it was taking a little while, and they were saying, well, hey, could you pause that for a second and write the next Iron Druid book, because people are waiting for it, and you could write those faster, and we'll get something, we'll keep the publishing wheel turning, and then you'll come back to the epic. And that I did do that. I had to pause the writing of the epic, write an Iron Druid book, and then go back to the epic afterward. So and at the moment I'm working on the third portion of the epic, and they just take longer. They're big books, and they just take a long time, because I'm juggling all these different narratives, and it's not as easy to write as the urban fantasies are. So but it's a mountain I wanted to climb, and it definitely feels like a mountain, sometimes, it's a hard slog to get these books done, but I'm super proud of them, and glad I wrote them, because again, it's just something that hasn't been done before narratively, and I wanted to see if I could pull it off. Something, I was trying to bring the experience of an old time epic, the way Homer or Virgil performed their epics. I wanted that experience of a bard telling a story each night brought forward to a modern prose audience. Like, can I even approximate what that's like? And so that's what the Seven Kennings is kind of doing structurally, is we have a bard telling you the story from multiple points of view of what's happening in a very large war. So
well, it sounds very intriguing. I think your description of it should inspire a lot of people who maybe haven't picked it up yet to go out and do that. So congratulations on doing not just something new and different, but something that you really wanted to do.
Yeah, I couldn't have done it. Early, I've wanted to do it for a long time, but I couldn't have done it until I'd written a few more books first and figured out, how to do the different voices.
Sure.
That was a key component of making this work, and I couldn't have done it earlier on. I had to get a lot better at doing voice, and the Iron Druid Chronicles helped me do that. So
yes, it was. As I said, when you made that switch, that was, to doing that. That was really. I think it did give everybody. It gave you a different perspective as a reader. It opened things up to see. So I can imagine with 11 or 12 voices. Wow. That's something. Now, do you have a particular favorite installment from the Iron Druid Chronicles? Something, or from any of your series? Is there one that was your favorite, whether it was it was your favorite to write, or it was your favorite finished product?
My favorite book is actually A Blight of Blackwings.
Ah,
I believe, and a completely biased reader's opinion, my wife believes it is the best thing I've written.
okay.
And it is a culmination of a lot of things. A lot of stuff that got started in A Plague of Giants, get their payoff, and then there's a lot of new things that get started as well. I just believe that as a story is, and it was super well reviewed, thankfully, by a lot of folks saying, wow, this epic actually got better as it goes and stuff like that. And I do believe that it did. A Blight of Blackwings is probably the best thing I've written so far. So
Great. Now, sort of the opposite of that, is there a particular book that you struggled with a little more for whatever reason, that it just was a little more difficult in its birthing process, I suppose you could say?
yeah. The fourth book of the Iron Druid Chronicles, Tricked, was really tough.
Oh, okay.
I had to completely chuck the ending and rewrite, the ending. I got rid of about 10,000 words and wrote probably another 20,000. It was a big rewrite of the ending, and then there were a lot of edits on it as well. So That was a tougher one to write, for sure. Probably the most difficult in terms of, issues along the way.
Okay. And which is kind of interesting considering how much humor was in that. That one has a lot of, death and destruction in it because of the topic, but also it's got Coyote, so of course it's going to have a lot of humor in it. So I can see where that juxtaposition might also be.
Yeah, and I mean, there was also Oberon and his obsession with Francis Bacon and the scientific method and the experiments that he was conducting based on the scientific method during that, and that he was calling himself Snuggle Pumpkin. I mean, there's a lot of fun in that book for sure, but there was also just a bunch of structural issues to deal with, and I did a really extensive edit and worked out at the end. But it was just in the process, it was a tougher book to write than most.
And the fact that it was about halfway through is also, I mean, halfway through the series is kind of, maybe that is part of it as well. Who knows?
It was
right?
I had a colleague tell me it was a bridge book. That you're really bridge books are tough to write because you're like, well, how does this stand on its own? But it's also connecting, what happened previously to what's to come. And pardon me. So it is the thing where sometimes people are like, well, wait a minute, why do we have to have this bridge between this and this? Well, you always do have to have a bridge, right? If you want to get from point A to point B.
Right.
But sometimes the bridge is not, what people would consider a point. There's point A and point B. I'm interested in those two things, not the journey between. And so, yeah, it's really very much about, connecting one massive narrative to another massive narrative that's, begins later. So, that's a tough part of the book too, is what is its role? Is it really wrapping up what happened before? Is it starting something new? Is it doing both? And that was the difficulty behind it.
Okay. Well, now someday when I go back and reread those, I'll say, oh, this is the one.
And you should do that this year. I actually just turned in revisions on it today.
Okay.
So the reissues of the Iron Druid Chronicles are there, every 10 years or so, they like to do new covers to update the artwork. And at that time, you can do small edits and things like that. And I've done that. So when these come out this year, the first 3 are coming out March 15th.
Okay.
They're all going to have bonus material at the end of them. They also are all revised and expanded because I've had the opportunity to go back and fix them. In Hounded, there was a typo where they say you got their just desserts, but it was spelled deserts. You got their just deserts. It's been driving me nuts for 10 years. That I kept trying to fix it and they wouldn't do it. And then when it came back, like through on proofs, they still hadn't fixed it, even though I said, you guys need, and I'm like, wait, is there somebody in production who really believes that it's supposed to be deserts? No, it's desserts. So I'm still nervous about it. Until I see the very final product, I won't believe that they fixed it, even though they say they have. So I'm really nervous about it. If it still says just deserts, I don't know what I'm going to do. But anyway, that's kind of the fun part about this particular year for me, is that the Iron Druid Chronicles being reissued with all new covers done by Sarah J. Coleman, who did the ink and sigil covers. So they're going to have this.
Yeah.
They're all going to be trade paperback, and they're going to have this gorgeous new artwork and consistent artwork, so that everything will look nicely consistent on the shelf. And then they're also going to contain bonus material. We've got short stories at the back of each one of them. In some cases, brand new stuff that's never been published before. So I'm very, very excited for that to come out. So if you guys want to come out and see me, or order signed copies, you could do so through the Strand in New York or the Savoy Bookshop in Westerly, Rhode Island. Google them, contact them, get signed copies sent to you.
There you go. See that? And yeah, I knew that they were coming out with the new covers, but I didn't know all the details. So this is amazing.
Yeah.
So yes, that sounds great. Well, now for a craft question, I've got just a couple more questions for you, but
Sure.
the when when you're writing, do you prefer to have just absolute quiet around you, or do you like some sort of background sound like music, or so I know people who like having the TV running or something that's kind of like white noise. What about
Yeah.
you?
I sometimes do the absolute quiet thing, but most often it's instrumental music of some kind.
Mm, okay.
Nothing with lyrics, because the words, and are going to interfere with the words that are trying to come out of my brain. So I listen to, sometimes it's classical, sometimes it's instrumental metal. Especially if I'm writing a fight scene, I need some of that high energy stuff.
Right.
And then sometimes it's movie soundtracks. Today's modern classical in a sense. And then sometimes it's some of that Zen meditation, spa music, where it's just like long organ tones and bells and things, you know what I mean? So it
Right.
just depends, but it's never anything with lyrics. But that's what I like to write to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you are always so great about promoting other writers that you're enjoying, whether they're within your genres or not. And I'm curious, what are you reading and enjoying right now?
Okay. Let me tell you about an epic fantasy called The Bone Shard Daughter. And it's by
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, Andrea Stewart. Fantastic. Just really fantastic world building, and also magic system regarding bones and what you can do with them. So and then there's also an animal companion for one of the main characters, which of course I adore. And
Of course, of
yes,
course.
and just a brilliant book. The second book is out now. It's called The Bone Shard Emperor, and I believe the third book is on its way. It's called The Bone Shard War. So I would dive into those. If you like
Okay.
epic fantasy at all, try The Bone Shard Daughter, see what you think. Really well done. And then coming out tomorrow, I don't know when this is going to air. So coming out February 1st, it'll be out. By the time you see us, it'll be out. Read The Violence by my friend Delilah S. Dawson.
Yes.
She is so dang good. If you read the back of the book, it sounds like it's this very heavy issues oriented book. Might be a slog because of the heavy issues, but no, it's not written that way. This is my buddy who knows how to write a thriller, and so it's a thriller that also deals with heavy issues rather than being a heavy issues book that has some thrilling moments. You know what I mean? There's a huge difference, right? So this is, I couldn't put it down. She writes such a great tale, and yes, the issues are there, but it's never presented in a way where you're like, oh my god, I can't handle this seriousness right now. It's always that just the right amount, along with all of the action, so you never put it down. So read The Violence by Delilah S. Dawson. It was the best book that I read last year because I got to read it ahead of time, and it's, unless something else better comes along, it'll probably be the best book I read this year too.
There you go.
It's really a step up. I've told her that she's this is, I'm a fan of all of her work, but this is a level up for her for sure. And I think everybody's going to dig it. Please go grab it.
Well, there you go. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for taking the time to come here and answer all these questions for me and for our viewers. I know that there are a lot of people who, will be very happy to see that, oh, this is the newest, the newest installment in the interview series. And I do, and everybody look forward to not just the books that you've recommended by other people, but your upcoming reissues and the third Kennings book, and hopefully more Ink and Sigil somewhere down the road, because I love them.
I'll be writing the third book of the Ink and Sigil series after I get done with the epic fantasy. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, we don't want to get those confused. Yeah, that would
right.
That would be kind of funny though if one of them shows up and you're like, wait. That wasn't supposed to happen that way. But Kevin, thank you so much. I do hope that I will get to see you in person at some point in the
Likewise.
future. It's always been a pleasure. And but as I said earlier, I will take this way of getting to meet with you. And again, I appreciate it so much. We appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch this interview, and go get some great books. You've got some wonderful recommendations here from someone who knows.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it. Thank you, Carol.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
All right. Take care, y'all.